Welcome back here to Under the Plate, and today we're going to talk about Cid Highwind, one of everyone's favorite Final Fantasy VII characters, and one of the new party members of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. So Payne, what are you thinking about Cid?
Well, he was finally introduced in Rebirth. The closest we got after Remake to seeing Cid was just him being casually mentioned in some side stuff in Crisis Core. But now it's time for him to actually be playable. But first, I kind of want to touch this little topic that I remember some people stirring up on the internet about. I remember after Rebirth, some people were saying that, oh, what if Cid and Vincent wouldn't be playable in Part 3? I think there's an interview where they're like, well, if we look at the pattern, let's think about what Cid and Vincent will be in Part 3. So what do you have to say about the people who are worried about Cid not being playable in Part 3 somehow?
I don't understand how that makes any sense. That has never made any sense to me. This is a remake. We've seen every playable character in FF7 made except for Cid and Vincent so far. I really don't understand how it's even a question that these two characters are going to be playable. I know people were like, oh, they should have been playable in Rebirth. I don't think it made much sense. They were introduced so late, and you also have to give people something to look forward to in Part 3. So we're going to get Cid and Vincent playable, and it's going to be great. But yeah, I don't know, man. I say go play the original game.
So getting this out of the way, we're going off of this entire thing. Cid's playable. It's just obvious, truly. So the next thing about Cid is, well, when you think of Cid, what do you think of character-wise? Probably a kind of crass individual, little stubborn, and a little goofy sometimes, right? That's not really who we got in Rebirth, and a lot of people noticed.
Yeah, it's like his personality in Rebirth, in the original game, he's this crude, they call him old man. He's in his 30s. He's not that old. But he's this crude man who, just is notorious for having a short temper and, using, language and stuff. But at the same time, he has a good heart. He's just he can be very arrogant. But yeah, Rebirth completely took that out the window, where he is kind of this more Mr. Charisma character is what I would say. And he doesn't really have the language that he uses in the original game. And so, I think that there are reasons for this, and we kind of talked about it actually way back. And I believe it was episode 4 of Under the Plate, where we kind of talked about Rocket Town, where we think it might be and stuff like that. But, I almost kind of propose to people who complain about Cid. I'm like, every other character has been so perfectly captured. I just really find it hard to believe that they would miss on Cid. And I think that the reason he acts the way he does in Rebirth is because he's on the job, right? We're paying him, we're customers, we're paying him to take us around. So I completely would understand that, if I'm flying on a plane with a guy and he's cussing me out, I probably wouldn't want to be there, right? It's it kind of makes sense if Cid was, putting on not an act, but putting on, Mr. Business and, trying to be, the guy for the customers that is outgoing and easygoing and, is fun to be around, instead of, Mr. Arrogant, let me use some language here and there and scare the customers off. So I think that that's definitely something that is possible, but I know that a lot of people are upset about certain things about Cid. People are still reluctant to believe that he might still have the foul mouth that he does. And, he doesn't smoke in Rebirth. That was a huge deal for him in the original game. So it's going to be interesting, but I will say, I think we as a community need to hold off and wait for Part 3, because once again, we need to see Cid in Rocket Town and how he's interacting with Shara and the people there, because I just find it hard to believe that we should expect, Cid on the job to be arrogant to his customers.
And an interesting thought that crossed my mind. we actually have seen Cid act almost in exactly this manner before, with this customer facing like persona in Kingdom Hearts.
Yep.
Because he doesn't treat anyone like that there. And I get, slightly younger demographic in Disney, but is that really that far flung of a concept to grasp?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's concern that like the Kingdom Hearts Cid is like the new Cid and like they're going over, writing over his original story, but I just really don't believe that. I'm sorry. Like I really just don't believe that. Like I said, I mean it's like it's one thing if, okay, they've changed a bunch of characters to where like, Yuffie was this super serious person, which they haven't. Every other character is so perfectly captured. It's just, I just refuse to believe that Cid isn't going to be the same once we get this game.
And I wholly agree. Imagine the impact it'll have if, like, oh, you finally roll up on Rocket Town, you go into Sid's house, and he kicks his feet up on the table, throws some swears around, and lights up a cigarette. And that sounds something that would exactly happen in Remake or Rebirth. We've seen other characters smoke, there's cigarette butts on the ground, people drink. Like,
Right.
this... I don't see them just completely destroying this part of Cid's character like that. And
I don't either.
like I said, in Kingdom Hearts, he has a bit of that feistiness, just like in Rebirth. He'll throw around like a couple lighter swears and just maybe be a little pushy from time to time, a little stern, but he's also a lot more receptive, which does kind of fit this people-pleasing businessman type thing, because, I mean, it doesn't look like his airstrips get used a lot, so I'm sure he's, pretty receptive to taking whatever he can get.
Yeah. And, I think, people were concerned because, they made, and this happened for Yuffie too, this happened for a lot of characters, right? But like with Cid, in the original game, we actually meet Cid by stealing his plane. And then Cid is there, and that's how we meet Cid. In Rebirth, that obviously is not the case, and we meet Cid at the Gongaga airstrip, and he's this guy that just, is like a, like he cargoes and ferries people around on his plane. So, but I will say, and I do want to talk about that, because stealing the Tiny Bronco is such an iconic sequence. And it's one of those things where, like, oh man, the crash and the water, and that still happens in Rebirth in some capacity, although you don't steal it. I know people might disagree, but I still think that there is a decent chance that we do actually steal the Tiny Bronco. And I think that that's going to be done in Rocket Town. And, we might find, obviously, okay, Cid is talking, Rufus in the original game is in Rocket Town because he wants the Tiny Bronco, and, Cid is basically just pleading with Shinra to try to get them to restart the space program because he wants to go to space. And I think it definitely could happen, this idea of like the party goes to Rocket Town and they realize Shinra's there and Shinra's after them, and so they steal the plane, right? I think that's something that still could happen, to go to the, to the northern continent.
Yeah, I just think it'll be a scene that'll just be recontextualized.
Right.
Although I could see some concern of people like, oh, what about sailing the Tiny Bronco in, Part 2 Rebirth over this game? So I think, like in our old video, I'm going to say this is going to be something that happens pretty early. Because the main thing about the Tiny Bronco in Rebirth is that you're locked in between, like, the continents and stuff. However, you can, like, in Part 3, I honestly foresee you getting locked to the outside ocean.
Right. For
which is
Wutai and stuff. Yeah.
Wutai and everything else.
Knights of the Round, baby.
So, I think it'll be interesting to see how they handle the scene, because honestly, with us thinking about it from that angle, it seems likely that, we're going to get the Tiny Bronco again and be on the outer ocean.
Right.
So now it's like, boils down to, so how's this going to happen? And you offered a really good idea because he doesn't want that to be a bygone era where he lost like his chance, right? So I'm wondering if it's going to go more from the angle of, he's kind of throwing the party under the bus maybe, and then tries to get back on their good side, or maybe he realizes this is wrong and it's like, yeah, let's escape on the Tiny Bronco.
Yeah. I think, talking about the party and like his relationship with the party, um, I think that's honestly one of the most interesting things, right? Because we talked about this in that video. I know we keep referencing it, so like please go watch it because it's a good video, I promise. But we agree that like this is gonna happen pretty early in the game. Rocket Town, it may even be the first place we visit. It's gonna be one of the first 2 or 3. So we're going to Rocket Town, and Cid in Rebirth, he's like, he talks about Shinra, but he hates Shinra in the original game. In Rebirth, he's kind of indifferent in a way. He's like, oh, they have their uses, and it makes you think, like, again, like Payne mentioned, messing with the party. If we go to Rocket Town, what if he tries to turn in the party to Rufus to try to get the rocket restarted, which then causes, them to steal the Bronco and that kind of thing. It's going to change a little bit, but I think that kind of thinking and that line of thinking is pretty close to what we're going to get, because Cid is willing to do anything to get his space program restarted. I mean, that's his dream. That's what he wants. And I think with Shinra, him saying they have their uses, I think is honestly pretty telling in this situation, because, if he's willing to work with Shinra and get them, Cloud and the party or whatever, I feel like okay, well, Cid, thanks for doing that. We're willing to, look at potentially restarting the program, and that might be enough for him.
Yeah, so this could just add that darker edge to Cid that people have been, craving forever, because I don't even think he acted quite how he did in the original game in Advent Children. Although, admittedly, it just seems like he has chill sometimes at this point.
Right.
But, yeah, I guess I'm also just wondering, because in a way it would make sense for him to possibly not mind too much at turning over the party or something like that, because really his only connection to them in Rebirth that was personal was Aerith.
And she's gone.
I think what could be a turning point for Cid is possibly when the rocket launches and the party helps him. So I think he would have been... it might start with him like, yeah, I'm going to turn these suckers over and get my space program back. But I feel like when he actually sees space with like Cloud and the gang, this is when he'll have like this like turning point in his heart and just be like, okay, yeah, let's bail out on the Tiny Bronco, actually.
Right.
I think there's just gonna be like a turning point for Cid where he fully connects with the main party, like if he already hadn't, because these different characters will react to things differently. It's entirely possible that Cid in Rebirth was more of a businessman that was just kind of being a bit extra because of Aerith, but then he might see what like Aerith saw in the rest of the party or something.
No, I mean, I think you make some great points. And I think, we talk about Cid's connection to Aerith with Ilfalna. I think that, that's going to come into play in Icicle Inn, right? And that's, Cid has so much potential to really be fleshed out in part 3. And he will. He's going to be a big focus of that because, all the party members are, don't get me wrong. But, Cid and Vincent in particular, these are going to be the 2 new characters who are going to receive a ton of development. And so I'm really excited to kind of see what they do. But, I mean, I think you hit it right on the money with kind of, what we can expect from that. And I mean, I know, there's so many different events that happened in the original game with Cid. Beyond, I would say beyond post, Meteor, right? In terms of like, Cloud giving Sephiroth out the butt materia. That's where I'm really excited the most, because that's where we get, the Highwind comes in for the first time. We get, we get the Shinra number 26 launching into space. I mean, all this stuff. Cid being the party leader for a little bit. Like, that's the stuff I'm most looking forward to. And I think not only is that stuff going to be there and pay off, but we're going to get this stuff in the beginning of the game too, with Icicle Inn and Rocket Town and stuff like that.
Yeah, because there's just a lot for Cid to be involved in, especially with him like taking over like main playable character role. And we saw a lot of that in Rebirth with, Yuffie getting in the spotlight, Aerith, Tifa. So they're already really good at doing that. But Cid has like an extended main character role for like some segments in the original. So I think whatever they start the game off with Cid with is probably going to be strong enough to where that feels pretty natural. Because, in the original game, it felt like, well, you did get him earlier, just outright. So they have to really, hammer this, like nail it.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the thing that they're going to have to do the most. But again, if there's one team that's capable of this, it's the remake team. Nojima has done such a good job at writing in the script for this and incorporating various pieces here and there of everything. I really am confident it's going to happen. And, touching on kind of these things that we're talking about earlier about, where Cid's going to be involved in later on, I really want to dive into the rocket because, like we said, this is like the crux of everything that Cid does and is hoping to do, really, is just to restart this, space project that failed. And I think that this is going to be such a special moment in part 3, seeing, the rocket get launched, go to space and stuff. I mean, it's going to be wild, dude.
That's like just that's the big thing about part 3. There's going to be so much in that game. Because just us even talking about how they're going to incorporate all this stuff with Cid, like, that's already a chunk. I feel like you could almost make a game off of what we're just talking about.
Oh, facts, man.
And it's just crazy, because here's all this stuff for Cid. We're going to have, like, extended stuff with Cid. And it's going to be really in depth, because like another thing that I'm considering is one of the best parts about Rebirth is just how characters will have little things to say, how they'll be split amongst each other. You'll see their interactions. You get like quests that focus on like Cloud bonding with this character, or these two characters doing this thing to solve this problem. So seeing Cid fit into all that is where I think a lot of this will really begin to shine, because now we're going to start getting his commentary, his sense of humor, and all that, and that's something I'm really looking forward to beyond the main story.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we talk about the way that these characters interact, and, we've seen relationships form with Tifa and Aerith that just weren't really there in the original game. And they were, but just not at the capacity we see them here now. And I think, when you think about, like, who's Cid gonna bond with, it's like, we've already kind of seen him slap Cloud on the shoulder a couple times and, like, just laugh and be kind of like the dad. I think him and Barrett and Vincent, like, I'm really interested to see how he interacts with both of them.
For sure. And I think Yuffie's such a firecracker that he'll probably rile her up or get annoyed by her, similarly to Cloud.
Yeah, dude. I mean, Yuffie is so funny because, like, whenever, they're flying in the Tiny Bronco in Rebirth, it's like she's almost sick, like, every time. And she's just so funny, dude. Like, Yuffie, I'm so interested to see, we had an episode, I think it was 22 or 23. We talked about Yuffie and kind of what we expect to see from her in part 3. I think that she's definitely gonna, not necessarily purposefully, but she's gonna torment Cid a little bit.
Oh yeah, because she's already getting to Cloud, and I think there could even be some commentary, like, as you're walking around, like Yuffie says something mildly annoying or cringy or something, and then Cloud and Cid are just like, ugh.
No, it's gonna be great, man. And you know, that's the beauty of Final Fantasy VII because you can have great characters. You know, there's a lot of games that come out nowadays that have great characters, but it's how those characters interact that really sets them apart. Because you can have great character writing, but at the end of the day, you know, if your characters aren't interacting and providing unique relationship commentary, then there's really going to be nothing there, you know? Like, nothing there to really propel that game into something, you know, really meaningful, I think. But FF7 does it so well. And, you know, I also think that Cid is going to be very, very humorous, like, especially towards the latter parts of the game with, like, Tifa and stuff. I think there's going to be some really funny commentary there because I think that, you know, he, assuming that he becomes really arrogant, we get the foul mouth and part, you know, in the early parts of part 3, you know, he calms down, but he doesn't really lose it. He kind of goes his normal self and kind of lets people see that. And I think that, you know, him just, I'm really, that scene when everyone comes back after they're like, let's everyone go and visit the person that you care about, you know, like the Highwind night, right? Like after that, and, you know, Cloud expects no one to be back, but everyone comes back. Like, I think that's going to be such a funny scene with Cid.
Oh man. I'm also just thinking of things like there's probably going to be times where Cid throws a "aw, kids these days" out, and I could just
Yeah.
imagine Barrett being like, "Who you calling a kid?" Like that, because like you were saying earlier, one of the magical things about FF7 and honestly just how they've been handling it too in these remakes is this is such a band of misfits, truly. Like, they're all from different places, different backgrounds. Like, it's such a diverse cast, and they all have been getting constant and meaningful interactions with each other. Like, that's what makes Rebirth really amazing. So to see this, like, culminate in part 3, it's truly going to be a sight to behold.
Absolutely. And I think really, you know, we kind of mentioned it earlier, but you know, one thing that's going to bring all these party members together is the Highwind. And we've got an episode in the future, can't tell you when it's coming, but we've got an episode that's going to cover the Highwind and, you know, our predictions, how we think it's going to work, that kind of thing. That's not what we're going to talk about today, but we are going to talk about, like, you know, the Highwind is going to put all the characters together in one space, interacting with one another. And, you know, Cid's going to be at the forefront of that as, you know, the captain. But I think, you know, in terms of we talk about, like, who's going to be on there, I'm pretty sure that the 7th Infantry is going to be, like, the crew.
Yes. Because, like, let's really dig into this statement. When we think about... So, after we all play Remake, see these side characters and all this other stuff, you kind of wonder how that was going to... If it was even going to play into, you know, part 2. But now that we've had Rebirth, we've seen, you know, the thugs, Butch and all them, they've reappeared. We've seen the Shinra middle manager. We've seen Andrea Rodea pop up, Madam M. So all these characters from Remake moved on and continued, even if it was just like a small, like, cameo thing or something in a side quest. They kept going. And the 7th Infantry has left such an impact on me from Rebirth. Like, sometimes I'll still hop into, like, my recorded clips and just watch some of that, you know? It's just so fun and endearing. And that's such a good place to put them in part 3.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel like that they have to show up. You know, you don't build those characters up the way you do unless they're coming back. And, you know, the whole... you know, farewell with Cloud thing. It's like, I think that's going to be so funny because obviously, you know, they're in Junon, or they were in Junon last time we saw them. And if they stick around, as you know, like, let's say they're the parade winners, so they're touring and they stay in Junon or whatever. Like, if they're in Junon and we had to go steal, you know, we have to steal the Highwind, right? And it's at Junon. I mean, I feel like, you know, if they're sitting there, and granted, remember, you know, Cloud's not there with the party, but if if there's enough people being like, oh, you're Cloud's friends. Oh, okay. Or, our captain. And it's like they all go and help steal the Highwind with Cid. And it's like, because our last episode of Under the Plate, I kind of talk about this. Like, one of my favorite moments in the original game is literally like Tifa just running off the edge of the cannon, bullets flying behind her. She just jumps off, and the Highwind rises in the sky, and she grabs the rope for it, and it flies away. And that's the first time you hear, the Highwind music. And I'm like, that's gonna be such a crazy moment. And it's so hard not to like, vividly picture this in your mind, because so many of these scenes I can like already see, I feel like. But that's going to be a moment that's going to be so, so awesome. And I think having the 7th Infantry there, especially when Cloud returns, is going to be really, really fun.
So, what's going to tie this back into Cid is, if these guys are going to end up being his crew, we're going to have to get some like cool character interactions and other stuff. Ooh, what if they use this to like really sell that? So you were like, oh, you're Cloud's friends, we gotta help our captain. So then what if it's like they become the crew for the Highwind, and like Cid's also their captain in a way?
Yeah.
So then,
yeah.
like, that's like the big maybe shake up when we play as Cid more. And, this is like the actual captain, the for real captain flying this thing.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's going to be super interesting to see how they make that dynamic work, because even if it isn't the 7th Infantry, I don't think that these people, the crew members of the Highwind, are going to be like random people that like have like 2 dialogue lines. I feel like that, they might not be fleshed out characters in the same way as like any of the side characters, like Leslie or whoever else, but I think they're going to have at least some characterization to them. And I think that's going to come into play for sure throughout the story. But you mentioned, playing, and since this is a game, I feel like we kind of have to dive in too of like, what's Cid's gameplay going to look like?
Yeah, so we already know the basics of the combat system. But Cid uses spears and lances and stuff. He's basically the Dragoon of original FF7. So, I wonder what his triangle ability will be. Will they incorporate, like, maybe a stance thing like Cloud? Like, maybe one where he's, like, readying to do jumps? Like, I'm just wondering. Like, maybe the circle button becomes the jump button or something. Because I feel like that's such an integral thing to incorporate with Cid. Like, obviously, jump could just be, an action command. We have things like that in Crisis Core, and Remake and Rebirth have abilities that, set you up for like more of a launch type thing where you move from one space to another, like zip towards the enemy. So it's not hard to like imagine that as just a normal ATB command. But I'd honestly like to see like, this like Dragoon movement incorporated into like Cid's actual base kit with like his triangle unique ability and everything.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, man. Yeah, there's so much there that could really be fleshed out. It's like, I think I wasn't even thinking about the whole triangle, because like Red's got vengeance mode and stuff like that. Like I'm really curious because, oh man, it's gonna be interesting because I do think that. Okay, I will say though, we kind of already have had someone that fought with like a staff, and that was Sonon. So I feel like you can kind of look at Sonon and kind of maybe infer some of the, animations and movement abilities that Cid might have. But I think Cid will be much less mobile than that, considering he's a quote unquote old man. But yeah, I mean, I think the whole Dragoon thing's going to be key. I think that he's going to be, I feel like that they're going to throw some gimmicks in there,
You just gave me like a crazy thought drawing the Sonon comparison.
Really?
I was like, okay, so what if like Cid's not like a playable like battle character? So first place you go is Rocket Town and then Wutai, and then he trains with like a spear in Wutai.
Interesting. Yeah.
Not maybe not likely, but it's just like a weird thought that you gave me.
No, I mean,
Just a little bonus to throw in there.
anything's possible, man. Anything's possible. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if they add something like completely new that we can't even really predict as his like triangle ability, you know. He's gonna have his spear, that's gonna be his thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's got some abilities that don't necessarily use the sphere. I said sphere, the spear, right? It's like because you could sit here and think, it's like, what does Cid do outside of having the spear, right? He's a pilot, he's a tinkerer, an engineer. So,
They
maybe
could
it would be
incorporate those machinists and stuff abilities
right.
from other Final Fantasies.
That's what I'm thinking. It's like, what if his triangle ability allows him to potentially build or control stuff? Right. I'm not saying it's a little out there for sure, but I do think that I do think that there's going to be something there that's beyond just him using a spear and his abilities, because all the characters have been so unique, and we think about Cid is going to be slower than a lot of the characters. I mean, it's just a given. And with that limited mobility, it makes me feel like that he's got to have something that's going to help him close the gap with people. And I feel like that might be some sort of range, because Vincent's going to be ranged. Aerith was ranged. We lost Aerith. And outside of that, it's like, okay, you've got Barrett
And Yuffie.
and Yuffie.
But Yuffie's like a hybrid.
Right. Yuffie's everything. Like it's hard to put her in one category, but it's, and that's why I'm thinking with Cid, it's like, I feel like they're going to add something really unique that's going to set him apart from everyone else in the cast. And, this goes for every character, of course, but I'm just thinking out loud here. It's like, I think it would be cool to see them branch from beyond just a spear and, give us something a little more.
So I have a few ideas that I'll throw out. So like if we're going from the engineering perspective, so you know how like Barrett's triangle ability is like, he's building overcharge and then he'll get like the shot. So
Yeah.
that's like an additional meter. So I thought of a couple ways that could be used for Cid. So one of them, if they lean into like the engineering stuff, what if, just doing attacks, jumps, ATB or whatever charges the triangle ability gauge, and then when it fills up, you can like maybe build something or like upgrade your spear or something to give you some type of advantage.
Interesting.
Or if they wanted to just be like triangles the jump thing, maybe you can build meter on your jump and get higher jumps, and when it's full, you get like high jump or something, and Cid just has like really powerful jumps that you can spend whenever you want.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that would be sick. I think the jump stuff's gonna be crazy. That's gonna be so fun, because, I mean, dude.
What if he has like skills that gets him up in the air, and then you can jump in the air to get an even bigger height?
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm almost sitting here like starting to want to retract my statement that he's going to be a little less mobile than others. Like,
You see, this is when he busts out the cigarettes and he locks in, and he
I
has
still
his
do
youthful
think-
vitality.
Yeah, I still do think that he's going to be a lot slower to run around than everyone else, but the jump is what's going to give him his mobility, obviously.
What if he's almost like Yuffie in the air, but then on the ground he like lumbers around like Barrett or Aerith?
That's what I'm thinking. Because it's like, Cid's not going to run fast. I'm sorry. He's not.
He's gonna have that goofy, like a running animation, like a cartoon character.
Oh, for sure.
Like an
I mean, just
FF7.
look at Advent Children.
Mm-hmm. Gosh. But I definitely think Cid's gonna be an aerial character to really emphasize the dragoonness.
For sure. For sure. I mean, you've gotta, everything about the Dragoon, I'm thinking now when you say this about like, man, I'm thinking about that fight with the Imperial Dragoon in 16 where he just leaps off the building,
Mm-hmm.
Like, that would be, Cid's obviously not doing that, but like, that kind of, just aerial mobility is going to be so cool to see how the development team will implement.
I'm also wondering if we'll get like any like story or lore stuff about why Cid's like uses like a spear and does like the dragoon type stuff. I wonder if there'll just be like some lines somewhere like, oh, when Shinra was doing their space program, they taught, all their astronauts how to like fight in like low gravity or something, or like aerial. Because
Yeah,
at this point they would have already known about Genova, so they know there's life in outer space.
right. I mean, dude, there's so much they can do, and I'm so excited to see it. I mean, again, I'm so excited for the rocket launch and seeing how, they work in and implement his relationship with Shara and all that. It's gonna be great, and I'm gonna say it. Part 3's canceled if we do not get the give me my tea.
We need our gosh dang tea over here right now.
I think it'll be there. That, like I said, man, the development team has been way too in line with everything about the compilation in the original game to mess up something like that. And like, we're not talking about like a minor thing. Like, this is an entire party member. So I think, if you have concerns about Cid, hold them. Wait. I would say let's take a wait and see approach, because again, it's just really hard to judge when we haven't, like, we don't know what they have planned for him, because every other one of the eight, there's 9 party members. Cid's, number 9, we'll say. Like, every other party member, the other 8 ones, all of them are like perfectly characterized. So I feel like it would be strange for one of the 9 to not be in line. So I think we just gotta wait and see. But I'm super excited for, Cid's story, how they're gonna work his connection with all these characters, the side events, the Highwind, his gameplay. And really, this is, I think, going to be one of the highlights for part 3 for a lot of people.
And, we'll have a good amount of Cid sprinkled throughout the game now. We're not meeting him, towards like the latter half. We're going to have Cid the whole time, and that's something to really look forward to.
Absolutely. But with that being said, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Plate. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to let us know in the comments, your thoughts, hopes for Cid, where you think we might, encounter the real Cid, what's going to happen in Rocket Town, everything and all that. But once again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Under the Plate.